Hi, everybody. Pete Sardis for The Lawyer You Know, and we are back talking about the Elizabeth Holmes, Sunny Balwani, Theranos saga. It's been a while since we've done an update, but a lot has happened over the course of the last few months, and one huge bombshell that I will tell you towards the end of this video. But before we do that, as always, if you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up. If you've enjoyed this series, please subscribe to our channel. And as always, please leave me questions and comments down below. All right, before we get into the meat of what's going on, let's do a quick recap. As you know, Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani were both prosecuted for fraud by the federal government. They both went to trials separately and were convicted. Elizabeth Holmes was supposed to be sentenced originally in September of 2022, and Sunny Balwani was scheduled to be sentenced in October. Obviously, both those did not happen. They've been continued. Elizabeth Holmes' sentencing is currently scheduled for November 18th, and Sunny Balwani is just a few days before on November 15th. Is it strange that the sentencing's got continued? Not really. Frankly, it's the norm more than the exception in a case, especially of this magnitude. And the reason is because there are so many things that have to happen between a conviction and a sentencing that take time. For example, the probation department has to have an opportunity to do their pre-sentence investigation. They have the obligation to provide their findings to both the government and the defense. The parties both have the right to make comment before any of this information goes to the court. It takes time to do these things, so it is not strange, especially in a big case, to continue sentencing. So we'll keep our eye on it and see what happens towards the middle of November. We'll keep you posted on that. But let's talk for a moment about what has happened over the course of the last few months. August 8th, apparently, Adam Rosendorf, who you will recall is the former lab director at Theranos, and a key witness in both the Elizabeth Holmes and the Sunny Balwani trials. If you recall, he was the one that testified that the labs were producing results on commercially available machines, that they were using diluted blood samples, that the Theranos results simply just were not accurate and were not working, and that the information being touted by Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani to investors, the public, physicians, patients, everybody basically, was not consistent with what was actually happening inside of the company. So very, very prominent witness, I believe very key to the conviction for both Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani. So what happens? On August 8th, he shows up to Elizabeth Holmes' house. This is where the stories kind of diverge a little bit. Dr. Rosendorf's version of the facts is that he went to Elizabeth Holmes for some sort of cathartic moment. He wanted to just, see her, and he wanted to just bring some closure for his own mental well-being of this case. When he got to the house, Billy Evans, who, as you recall, is Elizabeth Holmes' significant other and the father of her child, opened the door. His version of the facts is that he did not let Dr. Rosendorf speak to Elizabeth Holmes, and that he told him to leave. Dr. Rosendorf then responded with something to the effect of, "I want to apologize to Elizabeth Holmes. The government made this thing far worse than it was. And, it was not a fair representation about what actually occurred at Theranos." Based on this information, Elizabeth Holmes' lawyers file a motion for a new trial, which you would expect them to do. And why would you expect them to do it? First of all, they're obligated to zealously represent their client, and they need to put this in front of Judge Davila so that he can make a decision about whether or not this set of facts somehow affects the fairness of the Elizabeth Holmes trial. Issue number two is, in order to appeal this issue, they have to bring it before the court and have to get an order, because the appellate court can only consider what the district court has ruled on. So I absolutely expect them to file this motion when they did. So what happens? They file the motion. Sunny Balwani's lawyers catch wind of it. They join the motion, filing their own motion to dismiss. Judge Davila basically denies Sunny Balwani's motion very quickly, no hearing, no nothing, but grants Elizabeth Holmes' lawyers the right to a hearing. So what happens? October 17th, they all go to court, and the lawyers for Elizabeth Holmes call Adam Rosendorf and put him up on the stand. They try to ask him a lot of questions about his mental health, about his psychiatric and psychological conditions. There are some questions revolving around a news article from South Africa where Dr. Rosendorf told some reporter that the Theranos saga, I don't know how else to say it, caused him to have a mental breakdown, caused him to be hospitalized. He needed to be medicated, and it just emotionally was very taxing on his life. The judge does not allow the defense to get into those issues. What the judge does do is he poses some questions to Dr. Rosendorf. The questions being, did you testify accurately at the trial? Yes. Did the information that the government elicited from you at the trial, was that a fair representation about what occurred at Theranos? Yes. And that was the extent of what the judge asked Dr. Rosendorf. He did not issue a ruling, meaning the judge, yet I expect what's going to happen is Judge Davila is going to give a written ruling on this matter, and he's going to basically talk about what the testimony is. He's going to talk about what the law says, and he's going to make his findings ruling in that motion. My gut says he's going to deny the motion, but at least give the parties something in writing so they can see it. And of course, it will be there memorialized for the appellate court to consider. In the meantime, while we're waiting for this to happen, Elizabeth Holmes' lawyers have filed another motion. This time, they're asking for Judge Davila to allow them to question Dr. Rosendorf about his mental state and his psychiatric history so it can be memorialized for the record. They want to do this something called in camera, meaning outside of the public view. Now, do I think that Judge Davila is going to allow this? Probably not. I'll tell you why. A lot of people have mental health issues, depression, anxiety, all kinds of things that people suffer from. And that those afflictions do not call into question their ability to tell the truth. They don't cause them to not remember facts and to be able to articulate them accurately. And there is no indication that Dr. Rosendorf had any mental problems, any issues at all prior to his testimony or during his testimony for either the Elizabeth Holmes or Sunny Balwani trial. This is all stuff that happened after the fact. So from a perspective of a public policy provision, I don't think Judge Davila is going to grant this motion. It just causes too many problems. I think what you'll wind up seeing him say is he's considered it. The issues are not relevant to whether or not Elizabeth Holmes had a fair trial, and he's going to rule most likely denying both motions. So we'll keep you posted as that happens. Let's talk about the bombshell. The defense shows up for the October 17th hearing, and Elizabeth Holmes is with them. And Elizabeth Holmes is visibly pregnant. The news media caught wind of it right away, and it has hit the press. Now, this is a big deal, and I'll tell you why. If you recall, Elizabeth Holmes became pregnant with her first child kind of during the pendency of this case. And a lot of people on social media were commenting that either she's doing this to gain sympathy, to get a lenient sentence, to try to get the jury to nullify a guilty verdict, and that she's trying to somehow affect this trial. A lot of other people were commenting about how could Elizabeth Holmes, recognizing that she's risking going to prison for a very long time, how could she have a baby? So all of this is kind of coming back around. People are having the same exact conversation. So let's talk about what all this means. The federal sentencing guidelines do not allow a judge to consider familial status for a purpose of either enhancing or reducing a sentence, meaning just because you're a parent or you have children or whatever your family state may be does not mean that the judge should consider that in issuing a sentence. So right off the bat, having a baby precludes consideration. Number two, the Bureau of Prisons has systems in place to deal with pregnancies of inmates. It happens all the time. There are plenty of pregnant people inside of the Bureau of Prisons. They are good at dealing with prenatal care. They're good at making sure that babies are born in hospitals with the appropriate medical care. There is even a system to provide inmates and the babies time for bonding after the fact under the supervision, obviously, of the Bureau of Prisons before the child is put with family members or given to the Department of Children and Families to take care of, okay? So the court system and the prisons are adequately equipped to be able to deal with pregnancies. Now, what I will tell you is if I were Elizabeth Holmes' lawyers, I would have told her, don't try this because something bad can happen to you. If Judge Davila believes that you're trying to use a pregnancy in order to affect this case, he could hit you with obstruction of justice. And what does that mean? If Judge Davila believes that Elizabeth Holmes is using the pregnancy in order to somehow obstruct the legal process, he can actually increase her sentence for obstruction of justice. Now, do I think that that's really in play in this case right now? No. Why? Because it looks like Elizabeth Holmes is going to do a lot of years in prison. We've talked about this. She's and both her and Sunny Balwani are off the chart when it comes to her sentencing guideline. The statutory max is 20 years. My guess is that Judge Davila is going to hand down sentences to both Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani very close to that 20-year mark and at least above 10 years. So again, that's what I think is going on. Now, could the defense team use the pregnancy for some motion? Absolutely. Could they move to extend or to continue the sentencing? Yes, they could. Could they file a motion to allow Elizabeth Holmes to self-surrender? And we talked about this in some previous videos. The Bureau of Prisons, for classification purposes, allows self-surrender to be used as a mitigating factor. What does that mean? In federal court, especially for white-collar cases like this one, financial crime cases, the courts oftentimes allow the defendants to show up to the prison that they're assigned to whenever their turn-in date is. You basically drive yourself to jail. And by allowing a defendant to do that, the Bureau of Prisons gives credit for that decision by the judge. And then what happens is those inmates either get better housing or they have some privileges sooner rather than later, like more phone time, things like that. So it's very, very important for a defendant to be able to self-surrender. Could the defense ask the judge to extend the timeline for when Elizabeth Holmes should report to jail? Meaning, judge, she's due in whenever she's due. Can you give her X amount of months before she actually has to show up to jail? Sure, they could ask for that. Do I think it's going to happen? No. And let me be more clear. Do I think the judge might continue the sentencing for some other legal reason? Sure, it's very possible. Do I think that the judges could give her the opportunity to self-surrender? Very probable. Do I think that there may be an extension of the time frame, meaning you're going to show up to jail 2, 3, 5, 6 months down the line? Sure, it could happen. But I don't think that Judge Davila is going to use the pregnancy as the predicate for those decisions. Why? Judge Davila is not dumb. He recognizes that the whole world is watching this trial, and he realizes whatever he does is going to become precedent in other cases in the future. And I believe the last thing Judge Davila wants to do is give every defendant in the Ninth Circuit, basically all of the federal courts in the California, that part of the country, the opportunity to say, well, Your Honor, Judge Davila allowed Elizabeth Holmes to self-surrender or continued the trial because of the pregnancy or gave her the opportunity to show up to prison, months or months down the line. I don't think he's going to do it because he doesn't want to open the door for all of these other people to be able to ask for that, because that's what we call precedent. So I think he's going to be very conscious about that. And I think he is going to consider legal arguments that do not have anything to do with this pregnancy. Of course, barring some issue, meaning if there's a medical issue that Elizabeth Holmes can't show up for the sentencing because of some medical problem, that's different. That's completely legitimate. And I think the court would consider that. But for our purposes now, we're going to wait for November 15th to see what the judge does with Sunny Balwani. A few days later, November 18th, is when Elizabeth Holmes is supposed to be sentenced. If those sentencings actually happen, we will follow those for you. I'm going to try to do a live with Peter Trago so we can give you the information as it happens. If they do get continued again, we'll just follow it until these cases come to fruition. But for now, tell me what your thoughts are. Do you think this case is going to be sentenced in November? Do you think that Elizabeth Holmes is going to get any leniency for being pregnant again? Do you think the judge is going to comment on this pregnancy? Do you think that the judge is going to let her kind of show up to jail whenever she feels like it? You let me know what you think in the comments below. But for now, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, give me a thumbs up. If you've enjoyed this series, please subscribe. And as always, leave me your questions and comments below. We'll be back with you as quickly as we can to let you know what's going on.